Welcome to this Sunday that is a sacred celebration for so many people around the world, and so we begin with the Christian faith tradition. Jesus was both a carpenter and a teacher long, long ago, who preached that all people should care for the poor and for their neighbors, loving one another as they also loved God. In Jesus's time, the Roman and Jewish leaders did not like him. They were so afraid that he would lead a rebellion and upset the way things were. So as Jesus became more popular, the leaders planned to kill him. The night before Jesus died, he was practicing the Jewish tradition of Passover. He celebrated at a Seder with the 12 disciples, some of his closest followers. The next day, Jesus was arrested, and then he was killed. Now, Liz James has written a little bit about what came next with a thoughtful reflection after the cheeky part. And I know many of you enjoy her work. So here are Liz's words for a moment. An Easter story. So Anne had gathered the kids, that's me, up to the front of the congregation to tell them the Easter story. And when she got to the part where Jesus's friends arrived at the cave and they rolled back the stone and Jesus's body was missing, she said, "Nobody knows for sure why he wasn't there. Some people believe there was a miracle and Jesus was brought back from the dead. Other people believe that people who cared deeply about Jesus had already come and taken his body and buried it with loving hands away from that cave. Still others believe that the whole story of Jesus is in itself not a true story in a literal way, but a myth, which means a story we use to talk to each other about big ideas. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't all think of this story in the same way, but at which point a kid interrupted her mid-theological speech and said in a bit of a duh tone, "Well, why don't we just Google it then?" Liz continues on with more reverence and a little less cheeky bunny. There's more than one kind of resurrection, I think. When I'm down, when I failed epically, I imagine those disciples on the day after Jesus died. They fought, they loved, they gave things up, they gave it their all, and it ended in tragedy and gruesome death. If you imagine being one of those disciples, you can imagine how very definitively they knew in their bones, this is the end of our story. They had no way of knowing that thousands of years later, people all over the world would think of that part as the beginning. It was the very failure that led to continuing on in ways that nobody could have imagined. I have no idea what parts, if any, of the story are literally true. I'm pretty sure Googling won't help it either. I know that I don't think about it as a story of a literal resurrection, though. Resurrection to me is taking this moment of having failed or been hurt so incredibly much and saying to yourself, this isn't the end of the story. This is only chapter 3. There are more fights to come, a bigger picture and a bigger struggle. And when I tell that story, this part will only be the tiny piece at the beginning. I'm not trying to tell you that you have to dust yourself off and get back in the ring. Maybe a larger story is about walking away from the ring or changing the ring. Or maybe the particular story you're in the middle of isn't a resurrection story. Some things just suck, and you're not obligated to always look for a bigger meaning. But sometimes that helps. Sometimes it can be a comfort. And in this world, I'll take comfort wherever I can get it. For me, the story of the resurrection is a reminder that the story is bigger than the part we can see right now. For me, the story of the resurrection is a reminder of the power that we have, if and when we are ready to say, this isn't the end. Let's find out what happens next. That's the finish of Liz's words. Our second story is an American Indigenous tale. The Woman with Red Leggings, the book is up here on my shelf, is published in the book Outfoxing Fear, Folk Tales from Around the World. It's narrated by Ella P. Waters, an Arikara doctor who was born on the Fort Berthold Reservation in 1889 and died in 1984. She had a lifelong interest in learning and preserving the Arikara traditions and language. The Arikara people have lived in what is now known as the Dakotas for over 2 centuries. The women planted gardens of corn, squash, beans, and sunflowers, thus enabling a more sedentary lifestyle. So they were considered semi-nomadic. The corn plant was so important, it was personified and deified as Mother Corn, who bestowed culture and protected the people. In fact, in the Plain Sign Language, the Arikara were designated as corn shellers. They also hunted buffalo. Village chief was a hereditary position passed through the male line, as was leading priest. Doctors like Ella could be men or women, and band membership passed through the female line. Here is Ella's tale, the woman with red leggings. When Hart Village was in the woods in the Missouri River bottomlands, the Arikaras were starving. It was in the winter and they were starving then. One time, after everyone had gone to bed, someone came to one teepee walking plainly on the snow. Then a woman lifted the door flap of the teepee. Then she lifted the door flap of the teepee. Then she put one foot inside near where the woman and man lay in the lodge. And then the woman said, "I came to borrow your kettle. I want to use your kettle." And then the woman in the teepee said, there it is by the door where you are standing. Then the people in the teepee saw her leggings. She had red leggings, the kind made of red trade cloth that the old people used to wear. The woman picked up the kettle. Then she went out. She replaced the door flap. Then she walked off distinctly on the snow, making a crunching sound going wherever she went. It was a long while later, and then they heard her again as she came just before dawn. The woman lifted the door flap. Then the woman said, "Here is your kettle. I have brought it back." Then the main woman inside said, "Set it there." Then she set the kettle down. Then she went out again. Then the woman inside got up, and then she uncovered it. Then she took the lid off the kettle that the other woman had brought back, and there in boiling water were strips of old leather rawhide. There they were in boiling water. After they had uncovered the kettle, they said, "Here is a pot full of old pieces of leather." And then one man said, "Why, she's brought us good fortune." Then a group of men tracked the woman over the snow where she had gone in the night, and there she lay on a scaffold. A scaffold is a burial place. When they looked at her clothing, it was the woman who had entered the teepee the previous night. It was the woman. She had red leggings. She lay there on the scaffold. When morning came and the men went up onto the hill, there was a herd of buffalo there. Now that is what happened when the people were starving in Hart Village over there in the woods. That woman was the one who changed their fortune when they were starving. There was a herd of buffalo there. So now we're going to weave the two together. Winter is hard. Suffering and loss and fear are hard. When the thing you need is scarce, support or comfort or food or faith, then when the thing you need is scarce, it is hard not to be hungry. The people are hungry for food and for their spirit to be fed. They're starving for new hope, for a sign they will survive the challenges they are experiencing. Sometimes we search for answers, and sometimes all we can do is wait. The kettle is loaned out. The teacher is taken away. On an ordinary day, in an ordinary week, when we are all full up and not afraid, it is easy to share. We are happy and generous and willing. But when it's hard and we are hungry or threatened, sharing is not so simple. When I'm really hungry, I like to think that I would still share. Everyone should be fed, everyone should be free, but it's harder to be generous when my own needs are not being met. The harder it gets, the more desperate we feel. Strangers begin to look less like neighbors that we are supposed to love and more like thieves. Like they will take our plot or our leader or our hope, and we have no idea if any of these will ever return. Think about the disciples and how they had to share Jesus with all the people all along the journey. But on the last night, the night before he was arrested, they wanted to keep him to themselves. They had run out of time, like the Heart Village people had run out of food. So lending the kettle to a stranger when you are starving, that's a big deal. Is the stranger going to take that empty kettle and cook herself a big pot of delicious stew, the thing they so desperately didn't have? What does it take to lend out our treasure when it feels like that's all we have left? Maybe the Heart Village people had surrendered to the idea that since there was no more food, they may as well let go of the pot. Maybe the disciples had surrendered to the idea that Jesus would be lost to them anyway and that there was no point in hanging on. Maybe they had all given up hope. And then the kettle returns, filled with water and old hide. That is what the woman in red leggings brings back to the hungry people. Not the fresh pot of stew they might have been dreaming of, but also not an empty kettle like the one they loaned her in the night, a kettle full of boiling water and rawhide. It is harder to find a bright side in the story when Jesus is returned empty, his lifeless body placed in a cave. But the story is not over yet. The stranger returns to the night and mystery builds. The night lends an aura of the unknown, the unseen. A heavy stone blocks the opening of the cave, and what's happening behind it in the cave is a mystery. Many are quiet. How often do we experience something and not know what to make of it? Imagine looking into the kettle and finding boiling water and old leather rawhide. I know what I would be thinking. What is this nasty stuff? I would be so glad that she had returned the pot, but I would wish it was full of food. I would not go automatically to good fortune. But maybe if I were in Heart Village, maybe I would feel differently. Because when we're in need and when there is a hunger in our belly or in our heart, we search for deeper meaning. One man sees good fortune. It only takes one to start. Where the others see leather water, one man sees good fortune. It turns out that you can extract some nutrition from raw hide boiled in water. There is very little appealing about this image, except perhaps if you were starving. Where some might see an empty cave, those who loved Jesus saw a possibility, and maybe even angels. When Jesus had told his people that he would never leave them, some believed him, and they had not entirely given up. The stranger had given the Urukara people an omen of good fortune. Jesus had given his people something new to believe in. And even when our sense of grief and loss is profound, the story is not over. Some men follow her into the night, the woman in red. And the women who loved Jesus, they went to the cave. Hope spreads. People want to believe. They need to believe in something. Every one of us will experience suffering, and every one of us will look for answers. They discover her dead. The cave is empty. This is the big moment in every transformation, where you understand what has been lost, where it can feel impossible to catch your breath. The people were hungry, looking for something to believe in. They ventured out and found death. When we are looking for the answer and we are faced with death or depression or a profound emptiness, there are three ways we can go. We can believe that the journey is over and all is lost and the grief is overwhelming. We can believe that the journey is stalled, that we must regroup, reset, reconsider, and take time to work through the possibilities. We can believe that the journey is just beginning. All three are true. In the morning, on that same hill, there is a herd of buffalo. In the morning, they meet up again with Jesus. A herd of buffalo means survival to the First Nations people, food and supplies and warmth. The teacher is restored to them, savior to the Christian people, love and resurrection. Good fortune had come their way. Maybe she was a mirage. The people were starving. Maybe they were seeing a vision and not a stranger at all. Maybe he was a mirage. The people were stricken with grief. Maybe they were seeing a vision and not their actual teacher at all. Does it matter? If we worry too much about that, we miss the beauty of the lesson. The critical truth is that there will be suffering. There will be loss. Nothing remains the same forever. And there will be hope and possibility, and new life will come into the empty places. There is no guarantee it will be easy, but there is always meaning to be made. Life returns to the Heart Village. In both stories, the people followed their hope out into the world, and they began again. Their faith was renewed. The tools to make it through the night, to inspire hope, to leave the cave, to brave the mystery, and to face the morning, the frightening, uncertain morning, these are the tools we forge in community with one another. If the story of the stranger brings hope, then the woman in red is a gift. If the Easter story brings renewal, then Jesus is a gift. But it has never been about just one person. It was never just about the woman in red leggings, never just about Jesus. It has always been about a community coming together, helping one another to survive, and continue to try again and again to find hope and a better life. Each one of us will be hungry, will be uncertain. Some of us here today are likely hungry or uncertain right now. And each of us, without knowing, could be the other person's mysterious visitor. The neighbor who shows up with muffins, the friend who calls to check in, the colleague who takes that shift for you, the stranger who smiles on the street. These are the small signs that sometimes shift everything. The mysteries of timing, the events that some people call grace. It could be that the villagers' own small act of kindness, sharing their kettle with the stranger, had been the thing that turned the wheel. Because offering kindness to someone else can help to lift ourselves out of our own predicament. We are the people of Heart Village. We are both hungry and we have all the ingredients for the feast. We are the people who visit the cave. We are both grief-stricken and we have the ability to find new hope. It is a loving community, sometimes messy and often misguided, but willing to pull together, that meets so many of life's hungers. And when there is a hunger we cannot feed, because that happens, we hold one another through the grief and then we look together for hope in the morning. The love of community is an imperfect web, strengthened by every good effort, and while it cannot solve every problem or save every life, it can provide comfort and courage and care and inspiration. We will do our best. We will fall short, and we will begin again. For this is the very nature and power of love. Blessed be.